At dawn, on a winter morning in the early 1900s, two shipyard workers walking along what was then known as Jarrow slacks noticed something pale lying in the mud. They thought it was a sack, or maybe a dead animal. It wasn't. It was a child, face down, barefoot, not moving. The discovery would become one of the most unsettling, unsolved cases in the town's history. A case that never found a name, never found a culprit, and never found closure. Jarrow slacks once stretched across a wide, black expanse of tidal mud, a place where the river pulled back and exposed everything it had been holding. Debris, wreckage, sometimes bodies. For generations the slacks had been a site of accidents, drownings and tragedies tied to the shipyards. But the discovery of a young boy in the mud more than a century ago stood apart, not because of what was found, but because of what was never explained. The boy was never identified. The cause of death was never properly investigated, and the river, for once, didn't keep it secret. The night before the body was found, several people reported seeing a small figure run along the river path beside the slacks. A boy about 8, maybe 10-year-old, moving quickly through the cold, glancing over his shoulder as if someone was behind him. In early 1900s Jarrow, a child alone at night wasn't unusual. Children worked, they ran errands, they navigated the town the way adults did. But the weather that night was bitter. The path was slick with frost, and the boy was barefoot. No one stopped him, no one asked where he was going, and by morning he was dead. When the workers reached the body, they found the boy lying face down, arms half buried in the sludge. His clothes were torn, his shoes were missing, and the mud around him was disturbed in a way that didn't match the tide. The workers reported the discovery to the authorities. The body was taken for examination, and almost immediately the case began to narrow, not towards answers, but towards silence. Standing where the slacks once lay, it's easy to understand how a body could be lost there. The mud had been deep, the tide moved quickly, and the landscape felt indifferent, as if it had seen too much to react to anything new. But the boy wasn't lost. He was found, and the details of that discovery raised questions that were never fully addressed. Why was he barefoot? Why were his clothes torn? Why did the mud around him show signs of movement? And why did the official record insist on a simple explanation? The official verdict was misadventure, a drowning, a tragic accident. But the coroner's private notes, the ones that survived, told a different story. A blow to the back of the head, bruising on the ribs, finger-shaped marks on the upper arm, and water in the lungs inconsistent with drowning in the slacks. These details suggested the boy was assaulted, possibly killed elsewhere and placed in the mud after death. Yet no murder investigation followed, no suspects were named, and the case quietly faded from the record. Walking around the area today, it's difficult not to think about the boy, about how small he must have been, about how cold the night was, and about how quickly a life could disappear into a landscape like the Slacks. The place doesn't offer answers, it never did, but it holds the memory of what happened, in the stories people tell, in the unease that settles over the mud at low tide, and in the lingering sense that something about the case was never fully revealed. To understand the investigation, or the lack of one, you have to understand Jarrow at the time. This was a town defined by the shipyards. Palmer's Shipbuilding and Iron Company shaped every aspect of the daily life. The shipyard wasn't just an employer, it was an authority, a political force, a gatekeeper of reputation. A scandal involving a child's death, especially one that might implicate workers or conditions, would have been unwelcome. And in a town where livelihoods depended on the yard's stability, unwelcome things had a way of disappearing. The simplest explanation offered at the time was that the boy slipped, that he fell into the mud, that he drowned. It was a narrative that fit the environment, but the evidence didn't support it. The blow to the head, the bruising, the torn clothing, the absence of shoes, none of it aligned with a fall. None of it aligned with a child wandering too close to the edge. Yet the accident theory persisted, not because it was convincing, but because it was convenient. Another theory circulated quietly, that the boy belonged to a local family, that something happened at home and the Slacks were used to hide the truth. But no family came forward, no missing child was reported in a way that matched the timeline, and no household was ever linked to the case. If this theory held any truth, it was buried along with the boy's identity. The most persistent theory was that the boy's death was connected to the shipyard. A child running errands, a confrontation, a fall, a panic. The injuries could fit, the silence that followed certainly did. But without records, without witnesses, and without a name, the theory remains speculation. A shadow cast by the shipyard's long influence over the town. Today the boy's story survives not through official records, but through memory. The kind passed quietly between generations. People speak of the Slacks with a mixture of caution and resignation. They talk about the mud as if it had moods. They describe the low tide as a moment when the past became visible. The boy may not have a name, but he has a presence. Let's look at the child's final hours. A child running along the river path. A confrontation, brief, sudden, violent. A blow to the head. A struggle. A decision made in panic or anger. And then the Slacks. chosen not because they were a good hiding place, but because they were close, dark and dangerous. The boy's body placed in the mud, face down, left for the tide, but the tide didn't take him. The boy's death reveals as much about Jarrow as it does about the crime itself. It reveals a town where industry overshadowed vulnerability, where the shipyard stability mattered more than uncomfortable truths, where a child's life, especially a child without a name, could be quietly folded into the background noise of industrial hardship. The boy's anonymity is part of that cost. His silence is part of that legacy. What we can say for certain is a child died under suspicious circumstances. His injuries were inconsistent with an accident. His body was placed in the mud. The official explanation did not match the evidence, and the investigation was minimal at best. These facts point toward a death that should have been treated as a crime, but wasn't. The boy's story isn't complete. It never will be complete. But it remains in the landscape, in the memory of the town, and in the quiet unease that settles over the place where the slacks once stood. Some stories end with answers. This one ends with a presence. A reminder of a child the river would not keep. A reminder of a truth the town could not face. And a reminder too that silence is part of history.